Good evening. I'm Corvallis Advocate reporter Jada Crinning, and co-moderating with me tonight is publisher Steve Schultz. Welcome to tonight's CitySpeak Forum. CitySpeaks are presented by the Corvallis Advocate, which offers daily news online and, in non-pandemic times, a twice-monthly deep dive print publication, along with live forums and storytelling nights. CitySpeaks are co-presented by the City Club of Corvallis, a volunteer-run nonprofit organization that seeks to present a diversity of viewpoints and constructive dialogue. Tonight, we examine how the local arts community has been impacted by the pandemic and how they've responded, which adaptations to the current moment have worked well, and what this may mean for artists and audiences in a post-COVID future. This evening's panelists are Cynthia Spencer, the Corvallis Arts Center Executive Director, Jimbo Ivey, the Majestic Theater Supervisor, Aaron Sneller, Oregon State University Events and Communications Manager, College of Liberal Arts and Communications, and Paul Turner, owner of the Dark Side Cinema in downtown Corvallis. For more information on next month's upcoming CitySpeak forums, visit the Corvallis Advocate website. Steve?
Thank you, Jada. Partial funding for these forums comes from Peak Sports and First Alternative Natural Foods Co-op. However, even with these sponsorships, there's no way we could present CitySpeak without our subscribers and our donors. We want to thank all of them. You really make this evening possible, and all these evenings that we do. You make next week's political debates, or rather next month's political debates, possible. Our forums on homelessness are possible because of donors and subscribers. If you're not yet a donor or a subscriber, please do consider it's only $5 to $10 a month, depending on what level you buy in at. Of course, we welcome over and above donations. If you own a business, consider taking an ad with us. Folks, local media, locally owned media is a rarity nowadays throughout this nation. Folks that are willing to support it, also rare. Join the folks that are helping to support this. We really appreciate it. Thank you. Jada.
Thanks, Steve. In a few moments, we'll turn to audience questions. To ask a question while we're live, viewers can comment on our event's live Facebook page, the Corvallis Advocate, or email us at cityspeak@corvallisadvocate.com. Again, that's cityspeak@corvallisadvocate.com. Now let's start with introductory questions from our editorial board. We'll start with Cynthia. Thank you for being here, Cynthia. First, can you share a bit about your experience in the arts and what you currently do in your role at the Arts Center?
Good evening. Thanks a lot for inviting me to be a part of this panel. For about 25 years, I was a studio potter, which meant I made a lot of pottery and then I had to try to figure out how to sell it. And I did that through galleries, art fairs, wholesale fairs around the United States. Over the course of all that time, I also taught pottery through the Benton Center and met a whole host of people who are really enthusiastic about ceramics. And there's quite a community here of potters. And over the time too, part of my part-time employment would be always doing a little admin on the side. So that got me into doing some nonprofit work, both for the local Willamette Ceramics Guild, one of the founding guilds of the Art Center, the Oregon Potters Association, and a statewide organization of about 400, 500 potters, and then eventually visit Corvallis and Corvallis Fall Festival and the Art Center. So that's how I kind of got snookered into admin with the arts.
Great. And what's currently showing at the Art Center right now?
Right now, we have a retrospective of Susan Johnson's work, about a 30, 40, 50-year career in the arts. And her work is a fantastic view of what a career in the arts is all about. She was a teaching artist for a number of years, and her style of painting after she left the Art Center just got stronger and stronger. So she has done this incredible body of work. She's also been a longstanding patron of the arts, and she served for a time as the director of the Art Center. So I thank her for being a mentor to me in this work, and hopefully my creative work after the Art Center will be as strong as hers.
Great. And since the start of COVID-19, since the start of the pandemic, what has the Art Center done to keep the Corvallis community engaged?
Well, like everybody, we did turn to virtual. We pretty early on, we created on Facebook, on social media, a virtual gallery for people could share. And originally I had meant it to just be kind of sharing the stress of this time because I started my own COVID journal. But what it's really turned into is just people's joy of creating. So there's a little bit of everything there. And we have a couple hundred people who just, whenever they think about it, they'll share things with other artists and people comment. And it's whenever I feel a little down or stressed, that's a place I can go and just know I'm going to just see a lot of art from people I know and people I don't know. And so it's been a real community connector for a lot of artists. We also started doing some artwork, art kits that we have been providing to families who are receiving food and supplies from the Corvallis Public Schools District. And the Art Making at Home kits are bilingual instructions and supplies to make kits. So because we couldn't go into the schools anymore or really invite kids to come to the art center to do creative exploration. So this was one way we could still keep community creativity alive for youth.
Great. Is the Art Center currently open or is it only the virtual activities going on online?
Well, we are open Thursday through Saturday. We run on a lot of volunteer power. Jimbo can talk a little bit more about that, but we've been really lucky to sign up some new volunteers who felt comfortable being in a public environment because they aren't in the risk categories necessarily. So we're open 3 days a week, and we're always open if you just really need to see a show and you can only get in a certain time, just email us and we'll try to make it available. But 3 days a week for sure, for open to the public. This Saturday, we're having our first in-person second Saturday Arts Day for families that we've had since March, and it'll all be outdoors, weather permitting, rain or shine.
Very nice. And I guess kind of just thinking about all of the adjustments that you've had to make the Art Center due to COVID, what do you feel like has worked best in terms of all those adjustments?
One of the things that's really worked well is all of us learning these new processes. I mean, it's interesting. I think we were probably an organization that was brought into the digital age a little bit kicking and screaming. But once we've been able to get things out online and connect with people, it's been very rewarding to see that we now have a way broader platform for connecting people. At our recent Arts Alive event that's been on the plaza for maybe 500 people will come and spend the day and do art together with us. We have it all online virtually for forever now, and we had people from as far away as Melbourne, Australia join us to participate. So it's really fun to have those kinds of connections.
Nice. And I guess, have you seen any other adaptations from galleries elsewhere in terms of adapting to COVID? And if so, is there any of those that has you particularly hopeful or maybe any that has you concerned?
Well, in the concern department, I'll just say that you lose a lot by not being able to come in and connect with art and connect with other people in person. In all of the reopening that we've been doing, the thing we keep hearing over and over is that in-person communing with art or communing with other people is just really missed. So that's a loss, and trying to figure out how to create systems where people can still have that kind of connection is still a challenge. But what we have found is that there's a lot of people who are on the online world and were way ahead of us, and so some of those people are folks that we may or may not have been reaching before who are stepping up to be really involved. What I hope to continue to do is find ways to connect people both to our programs, but to each other, because I think as everybody on this panel will say, is the arts are a really great way for connecting people who wouldn't necessarily be connected otherwise. And so I'm hoping that that's a great way to keep Corvallis a welcoming community place.
Right, great. In recent months as well, you've shown work exploring race and racism. When did the planning for that begin, and when did it show at the Arts Center?
So the Art Center, I guess probably a little bit because OSU is right up the street from us. We've always been a place that's really known for presenting art, public programming that can challenge ideas and can offer an avenue for understanding more difficult concepts. We've hosted shows about connecting microbiology to why that study is important. We've had shows about the benefits and challenges of immigrating, gender identity. This past spring, we had a show that was about I Am My White Ancestors, Claiming the Legacy of Oppression, which really very vividly showed stories of white people who've had white ancestors who were both oppressed and then turned around and became oppressors. And so those kinds of conversations through the art are really an important part of what we do. So through these kinds of exhibits, about 18 months ago, we realized that we needed to begin doing more to promote equity through the programming that we do. And we reached out to NAACP, and they liked the idea of the Claiming the Legacy of Oppression show. And we are we have just received a grant to start doing some equity and diversity skilled training with a consultant. And we're really working to make the Art Center a more welcoming place for everybody in the community. And I really am thankful that Jimbo and the work that he's done at the Majestic is being offered up to me as a way to kind of get involved with not just the equity and diversity work for visual arts, but also in the performing art world.
Great. And regarding some of those shows that you were discussing about race and racism and social justice, what are some of the themes that you're hoping to highlight in shows like that for the community?
Well, giving different voices a chance to be heard, that's a big one, because personal identity is so important to be able to understand the diversity of other people and other people's background. And so we do have right now a guest curator is curating a show that's called Black Art Matters. And then we do have plans to have a show sharing more Black, Indigenous, and people of color voices in 2022. So, it takes a lot of planning to kind of do all of this in a truly inclusive way. And so all of those are in the planning.
Awesome. Taking a step back a bit too, and just thinking about how the Art Center has adjusted to COVID-19, what do you feel has been the biggest challenge for the Art Center throughout this time? And maybe also what has been one of the most uplifting aspects?
We have, like always, spent a lot. I've spent a lot of my energies just finding the money to keep staff doing these programs that we know benefit the community. So the funding is always one of the things that is a challenge for nonprofits, and even more so in a time where we can't be open, we can't have classes. Our biggest show of the year is the Howland Community Open, where it's traditionally been our membership show, where people come, share their artwork, and remember to renew their membership. So that was a big loss for us to not be able to have the thousands of people come through the door to see that. Plus, it's just a fun show. So that's been our challenge, just adapting those kinds of funding sources. But having said that, what has really been rewarding is the opening up of hearts from so many new supporters and donors. and artists. We're getting ready to host our 32nd annual gala fundraiser, and artists all summer, even though it was difficult to find us open hours, were dropping off their 8x8 artwork donations that they spent time creating specifically to support the art center, and each one who came through the door with their artwork giving us their precious creation just was so heartwarming. So we managed to do a lot to still keep artists visible and active and inspire their creativity, I think.
Great. Well, thank you again for being here. We appreciate it. We'll move on to Jimbo now with the Majestic Theater. Jimbo, thanks for being here as well. Could you also share a bit about your experience in the arts and also what you currently do in your role at the Majestic Theater?
Sure. Thank you so much for having us here tonight and for, putting on this conversation. I think a lot of folks are curious about how we're doing and how things are progressing. So I've been managing arts and culture venues for about 20 years, and I started managing the Majestic Theater for the City of Corvallis Parks and Recreation Department in 2015 when the city took over management of that operation. And so for the last 5 years, we've been sort of rebuilding the Majestic and working with all kinds of different, arts and culture communities and communities of every kind to really, make it the home for community arts performance, or one of the homes for community arts performance. I think everybody in this call or in this panel is managing a home for the arts in Corvallis. And so, yeah, that's what I've been doing for the past 5 years at the Majestic as the theater supervisor.
Great. And what is the Majestic currently working on right now, if there's any current shows or upcoming shows going on?
Sure. So shortly after the pandemic, hit in March, we like everybody else pivoted to online, and so we started doing Zoom performances. And so we maintained about 2 to 3 shows a week, which was about what we normally did at the Majestic. And our community was just so ravenous. Most of the folks who do things at the Majestic is, whether it's dance or theater or comedy or whatever, that's what they do every night, for 2 to 3 hours for months on end. And so to just suddenly take away all of that, left a huge hole in our community. And so right away we pivoted to having those kinds of performances happen through Zoom. Since March, we've done about 40 performances, virtual performances, and about 30,000 of our community members tuned in. And so that was pretty awesome to get that kind of response. But really, it was just the neat thing was hundreds of artists were able to keep doing their thing with our support and just kind of figuring out how to transfer that over to Zoom. And so, that was our initial move. And then our next move was bringing performers back to the Majestic and filming them doing their performance on the stage with COVID precautions and physical distancing and everything, and then streaming that out to our audiences. And so that's kind of the step that we're at now. We're still doing the Zoom performances every month. But now last weekend, we closed our first Zoom musical, or our first live streamed musical with I Love You, You're Perfect Now Change. And so that was really cool. In August, we got to go back into the theater and bring actors and musicians in and have them, do their performance and then stream that out to our audiences. And so this week, on Saturday and Sunday, you can catch at our first Majestic Readers Theater streamed performance with Dear Elizabeth. It's a play of letters, and so it's between two poets from our time frame, and that is directed by Robert Leff. And so pretty much every month we'll have at least 2 live stream performances through this season of everything from our traditional theater offerings to concerts. Majestic Chamber Music is coming back in November, and then in December we'll have our annual Making Spirits Bright dance concert, which features many of the fine dance companies here in the area. But again, it'll be interesting to see sort of that experience from your couch rather than, packed into the theater. And so that's our trajectory for now until we kind of enter the phase 3 sort of concept post-vaccine. And then we can look at starting live limited audiences. And so bringing back audiences in smaller capacity until hopefully one day, we'll be back to having sold out audiences and doing all of our wonderful stuff.
Great. And kind of just going off that a little bit, in terms of that kind of those adjustments that you've had to make due to COVID, the live streams and the Zoom performances, what do you feel like out of the adjustments you've made have worked the best for the theater community in Corvallis?
Really, it's just, I think the thing that has made it work has been the determination of theater people to make it happen. I think there's that theater sort of saying of the show must go on. And really, all of our volunteers and staff really rose to that challenge and working within whatever restrictions there were to keep people safe, to keep our community safe. And so at first, it was just Zoom. Some of us had been part of Zoom meetings before, but it was really new territory to try to incorporate, sound effects or music or musical kind of numbers into that, program, which really wasn't meant for that. It was really meant for speaking to each other one-on-one in a meeting kind of format. But they really rose to that challenge and they got creative and they figured out backgrounds instead of scenery, the virtual backgrounds that can load into Zoom. They figured out costumes that they could pull from their own houses or make, quickly. And so I think it was just the adventurous and irrepressible spirit of our volunteers that really made everything possible for us. And then when we started moving into kind of coming back to the theater, just the support of the city of Corvallis and the Parks and Recreation Department in, doing things that weren't kind of within the norm as far as the rest of the city operations were concerned. We're different already, but then to think about doing theater in the time of a pandemic took so much effort and thinking, and they really supported us in our mission to not just close up and not just kind of hunker down until the storm passed, but doing everything we could to create a service for our community, whatever that could be safely, but just never kind of giving up and going away.
Yeah, definitely. And I mean, you mentioned this a little bit a few minutes ago, but in terms of reopening the Majestic to an audience, do you have like a reopening timeline in place? Or if you do, what does that kind of look like going forward?
Sure. I think, like so many other things like sports, like our schools, like, everything in our kind of world right now, it's really tied to how quickly we can, get rid of this pandemic and get infection rates down and get the vaccine out and get it into our community and in our population. I think a lot of it's going to be mandated by the state restrictions, that definitely guide everything that we do. But as far as our trajectory is, as soon as we do have that kind of time frame, I think again we would kind of very cautiously start slow and build up with a smaller audience. Definitely not our full 300 seats. Right now, we could be doing shows with less than 40 people. I think that threshold will probably be, once we're post-vaccine, that'll be the kind of, you know, starting point that we'll look at. I went to a movie theater for the first time this past weekend, and it was really interesting to see the adaptations that industry has made. And I think we'll kind of look at what they've been doing and what other theater groups are doing, and just set our pace very slowly to come back and do maximum safe. Because as we said, when people were signing on to do these shows where they come in to the Majestic and are filmed, this isn't 100% safe. This is risk. There is risk involved, and we want to always ensure that the safety of our volunteers and our staff is definitely above any priority to kind of rush back to try to, force normal to happen. I think we all know that the timeline's going to be long, and I definitely can't say when it would be, but I don't imagine that we'll be, back in the theater as far as an audience, this season. So I think it'll be after our 2021 season for sure.
Right. And since the start of the pandemic, what do you feel like has been the biggest challenge for the Majestic? And maybe also what do you think has been the most uplifting aspect of, trying to do that transition online and everything like that?
Yeah, so I mean, the Majestic really, its budget was based off of being able to generate most of its revenue. So we were only subsidized by about 20%. And so when you look at basically reducing your operating, charges that you can get from ticket sales down to very, very little. It's kind of a 1-2 punch of you have to do everything completely new and build everything from scratch, and you're going to have to, reduce your budget vastly, and furlough staff and do those things. So in one aspect, you're trying to do the hardest thing you've ever done, and then in another aspect, you're having to reduce the person power that you have to do that stuff. And so striking a balance and finding the funding was a really, really challenging moment. We were very fortunate to receive funding from the state of Oregon as part of their efforts to support arts and culture venues and organizations here in the state. And so that definitely helped. And of course, we have our amazing donors who, pledged their support. Um, and again, just our wonderful patrons and volunteers. We set kind of pretty conservative goals for our shows as far as ticket sales, and they blew right through them. This show that opened, that we just closed last weekend, exceeded its revenue projection in the very first evening. So we live in a wonderful community, that really supports the arts, and so that is the thing that has made a challenging situation easier. Um, as far as the highlights, I think a lot of people are talking about things that came from the pandemic that they hope don't go away, or things that they learned about their organization, themselves, their life that they want to keep post pandemic. And because the pandemic really disrupted our normal proposal process, our normal way of doing things, the kind of high load, high commitment shows where you have to show up for, 8 to 10 weeks every night. Instead, we started moving to shows where really you only had to come to a couple or 2 or 3 rehearsals because you had the script in front of you through Zoom, and it was over in a couple weeks. And so the commitment was much lower, the threshold to participate was much lower, and we suddenly saw people that we'd never seen before, faces that we'd never seen before. And so in an interesting way, theater through Zoom is much more accessible than normal theater is, typical theater. And so we found folks that had never been able to get cast in roles because of accessibility needs, or because of who they were, suddenly having the kind of starring roles in these shows and being able to do 2 or 3 or 4 or 5 shows in this 6-month period. And so the thing that I really loved about what has happened during the pandemic is we've realized that there were a lot of communities that we weren't serving with what we were doing before, and we're going to change how we serve those communities, now during the pandemic, but also once the pandemic is over. We're not going to go back to having those barriers that prevent folks from participating in our programming. And it sometimes takes an emergency or a desperate situation to see that stuff clearly. And so that's one of the really blessings of this terrible, terrible time, has been the realization that we weren't doing a good job serving a lot of our marginalized and underrepresented communities. But it's totally possible. We can do those things if we make it a priority.
Right. Great. This is going off that a little bit, I guess, but our understanding at the Advocate is that the Majestic has started to work on a bias initiative. Could you talk a little bit about what that looks like?
Sure. So historically, theater has always been dominated by the white dominant culture. Um, it's something that you can only participate in as an audience member, usually if you have the excess funds to go to shows, to pay to do those things. And as far as especially a volunteer performer, you have to have lots and lots of free time in order to go to 10 to 12 weeks of rehearsal, 2 to 3 hours a week, 5 to 6 nights a week. That kind of participation really depends upon privilege. And so, artistically, theater has had a problematic relationship with marginalized communities as far as cultural appropriation, black facing, brown facing, all of the horrible sins that dominant cultures visit upon marginalized and underrepresented communities. And the Majestic has not been free of that. How our current process started was when the city of Corvallis took over. The city of Corvallis is part of our city charter is enhancing diversity in our community. And as we started doing things and operating shows and kind of going along in the traditional way that we had been going, our community started calling us out because we were, amplifying harmful attitudes. We were participating in cultural appropriation. And so, it really started with call outs, as over the last, especially 5 years, marginalized communities have become bolder in calling out, microaggressions and macroaggressions and really just speaking up instead of staying silent and taking it as they have throughout history. Um, and so that really kind of came to a head about a year and a half ago. And we said, okay, let's educate ourselves and find out how we change this process and how we can become a place that does celebrate diversity, does enhance diversity, and a place where people from non-dominant cultures feel welcome and wanted, which just wasn't the case yet. The reason that 99% of the actors in our shows were mainly white folks was because they were mainly white folks. Those were the people who made the decisions and put on the plays and made those things. And so why would a person of color come to the Majestic Theater if they'd never seen themselves represented in those shows? And so we started working. We sought out organizations and groups that we could learn from, learn how to do this process without continuing of the harm. And so we worked pretty closely with folks from the OSU Office of Institutional Diversity, the NAACP, our wonderful, cultural centers on campus, just a wealth of amazing talent and beauty and wonder in those folks. And over the course of the last year, we put together what we end up calling the Majestic Theater Diversity Council. And so this is a group that's a mixture of diversity professionals and members of the BIPOC community who are performers or artists or writers. And so it's kind of a blend of professional technique or professional, backgrounds and the people that we're wanting to engage with and the folks that we're wanting to have, feel the Majestic is their home. And so essentially we started working on a report to just kind of look at all of the Majestic programs, our procedures, our processes, find all of the ways in which we were being harmful to the community, the way in which we weren't enhancing diversity and celebrating diversity and working towards diversity, equity, and inclusivity. And then, create plans for changes to policy, training, and procedures to address those issues and set goals for the future. And so pretty shortly here, I think in the next week or so, we'll be releasing that report to our community, which will contain all of our recommendations. And it's been a wonderful process, but it's been a process that, is difficult because part of this work is acknowledging harm that you have caused. And that's really hard for people to do, especially leftish, progressive folks, to understand that even as they see themselves as good people, they don't have the perspective to understand the harm that they participate in and the system that they're a part of that perpetuates this domination of marginalized and underrepresented communities every day in, everything from policies set by boards and councils and things like that to, how you talk to your friends and coworkers. And so that's been the hardest thing, is kind of unlearning our own bias, unlearning the things that I have internalized as, a white presenting male side, cisgender human in this world, and really just centering yourself in a place of humility and kindness and supporting and serving these communities that we're wanting to center in our organization. And so we've got, a goal within the next 2 years of having, going from 100% almost of our producers, the folks that lead productions at the Majestic, being white folks, to 50% of them being from BIPOC and marginalized communities. And so that work really isn't as simple, or as, that it's not easy work. It's not, you put up a sign that says BIPOC people welcome, please apply to do your show here. It's going out to our communities and the touchstones, the religious organizations, the cultural organizations, where these folks find community in our community, and getting to know them and participating, supporting them, and getting them to trust the fact that the Majestic isn't going to harm them when they do come and engage with our programming. And so it's not a quick process. It's not a Band-Aid. There's no easy fix. It's a culture shift. It's a brain shift. And we're just at the very beginning, after about a year or so of work, of taking and transferring kind of theory and reports and words into action that you will see when you start seeing these new faces and voices and stories on stage at the Majestic this year.
It's awesome. Thank you. Thanks again for being here, Jimbo. We
Cool.
appreciate it. I'll turn to Aaron now with OSU. Aaron, thank you for being here as well. To begin, can you kind of just describe your experience in the arts a bit and what you currently do at your role at Oregon State?
Well, thank you for having me here. And Jimbo, that was so eloquent. Just thank you for the work that the Majestic is doing, and your perspective. It's really impressive. I got involved in the arts as a volunteer many years ago. I'm not an artist or a performer, but I've always been a patron and an enthusiast, and love art and music, and worked on some large scale events in Seattle before moving to Corvallis, and got involved. I think my first involvement with the arts here was probably through Da Vinci Days. I worked assisting on the Shady stage, which was the smaller stage, for several years, and then worked on the main stage, taking care of the acts and, just various duties related to the performing arts with Da Vinci Days. And then I served on the Benton County Cultural Coalition, which provides grants for art projects. I took a position with the music department about 17 years ago here at OSU, and was their marketing and events coordinator for many years, and coordinated the Music a la carte noon concert series at the MU Lounge. And about 5 years ago, I took a position with the School of Arts and Communication, and in that position, I coordinated the SAC Presents Performing Arts series, and did the marketing for the art gallery and the art department. And I just took a new position in July as the events and communications manager for the College of Liberal Arts. So I have expanded my my involvement to cover other aspects of the liberal arts, which is really exciting to me. Speaker series and other things that that we do in the college. So I just got into this position at during COVID, so I don't even know fully what it's going to look like yet, but I'm really excited about it.
Yeah, that's great. I know like the university has been pretty much all remote since the spring. So has there been any kind of current or upcoming shows, or is it kind of all on pause right now?
No, it's not all on pause. Actually, we've done some pretty exciting things. The first, well, first and foremost, our service was to our students and figuring out how to continue to provide performing arts students and artists, a learning experience when they can't exhibit their work and they can't perform their music. And so we immediately pivoted in the spring, and boy, everything just happened so fast. But like an example would be our BFA show that we do in the spring for our graduating seniors. It's something that an art student works their entire education on, and we created a virtual show for them. And the exciting thing about that was then we could share it with the community, but they could share it with grandparents who wouldn't have been able to come to their senior show and that sort of thing. So it got out there, more than it would have with the live show. And granted, it's not the same as a live show, but it had positive aspects as well. We switched immediately the Music a la carte concert series to a Facebook Live series in the spring, and kind of went into the summer a little bit with it because we had such a good positive reaction to it. So they were live performances on Facebook, and at that time limited to Facebook because we hadn't switched over to Zoom yet. But we were engaging with alumni on the Cascades campus and on the Newport campus. We had alumni get in contact with us and say, in the chat that they were watching from New York and they were so excited, and why don't we always stream our Music a la carte concerts? So as much as it's just not the same as live performance, and we terribly miss live performances, there have been some positive things. Our theater department went to a really cool podcast series called Damn the Distance. And it's kind of a combination of kind of radio style performances, radio plays, but they also have super engaging actors and professionals from the field that probably they would not be able to pull into Corvallis to talk to the students. And then they're also available to the public. So that's kind of been another positive, a positive thing. I mean, it's theater is kind of, it's meant to be performed live in front of an audience that reacts to you. So there are definitely challenges with that, and radio performance isn't exactly the same. But I think that they're giving the students a great experience regardless, and exposure to things that they wouldn't have been, and people that they wouldn't have been exposed to. The Bard in the Quad performance was pretty amazing because they pivoted again to a podcast type performance, but they had a full score and amazing sound effects. And we had the opportunity for our music production and technology students to do the production on that. So those students got a complete different experience that they wouldn't necessarily have gotten, working on a live show. So, we're making the best of it. We most recently have been doing our American String Series, which was hosted with Jimbo at the Majestic. And we missed that beautiful stage, but we have been doing some remote versions of that. We had Jimmy Vaughn, we had Keb Mo, and just recently last week we had Roseanne Cash. And we've had an excellent turnout for those and a lot of enthusiasm, and people, they miss live performance so much, but they still are getting a chance to get to know these artists a little bit better. And again, we're able to engage with folks, alumni and other folks that we haven't been able to, that wouldn't be able to come to Corvallis for this. So we don't know what the future holds exactly and what things are going to look like and how fast they're going to move, just like Jimbo said. But I think that we're still giving both our students and our audience a pretty good experience, a very good experience.
Right, great. And I know we're going into the new school year, like within the next week or so. Is there any upcoming events that people can be looking forward to that are taking place online?
Yeah, we actually, there's a really renowned speaker and writer coming, Mitchell Jackson. He's from Portland originally, and he's a Black writer. That is part of the, his talk is at 4 p.m. on Friday, and that is part of the Cabildo's speaker series. We have that speaker series has been established to give Black voices a venue on campus, and we've got a series of 10 scholars programmed all the way through the spring. And she's actually adding to that pretty constant. It's a pretty impressive group. So we'll be posting information on that really soon. And we are continuing with the Music a la carte series, and we are working on, it will kind of be a hybrid where we'll have some artists performing from their homes or their home studios, and then we'll also have some, hopefully, some live streamed performances from the MU Lounge without an audience, and possibly some from outside on the SAC Plaza while the weather stays nice, and then from the MU Ballroom. So just kind of depends on where we're giving our students a venue to perform through Music a la carte, our faculty recitals through Music a la carte, and then we'll interject some outside performers into that series as well. So because we were dependent on how things progressed, we are kind of not scheduled out as far as we usually would be this time of year. So so you're going to have to go to events.org and state.edu and just kind of follow along and look for news in the Advocate, and we'll keep you posted as things are programmed.
Great. And you mentioned this a little bit, that it is probably difficult to say, but does the university kind of have a timeline in terms of when audiences can be in shows? Because I know there's a few larger venues at the university. Is that kind of a goal to have an audience in show anytime soon, or is it kind of like the university's holding off until, it's a little bit?
At this time, I can't speak for the whole university because I'm just representing the college, but we're not programming large scale events at this time. We have our SAC Present series on hold. It's just too hard with big name performers because you have to schedule so far in advance, and we just don't know what the timeline's going to be yet, and what it'll look like as far as like what the capacity of list cells would be with spacing, or and so like that affects your budget, and there's just too many unknowns right now, and so we're just rolling with it, playing it by ear. We're looking, our university really relies on research and on what the governor says we can and cannot do, and so we're just first and foremost trying to keep our students and the community and our staff safe, and that's our number one goal.
Yeah, for sure. Also, just kind of as someone who works for the university and has had to transition to this kind of remote programming, what do you feel has been the biggest challenge for you? And maybe also what do you feel has been one of the most uplifting aspects of the transition?
For me personally, in my position, you mean? Well, my big heartbreak was having to schedule 2 major concerts. We had 2 more performances on the SAC Present series, and one was a week after. It was in March, so it was a week after we left campus. And those performers, it was Slavic Soul Party, and they're from the East Coast, and they had their plane tickets, and we had tickets sold, and we originally rescheduled it for January. And then just recently we reevaluated and just decided to completely cancel it. And we hope to bring them to Corvallis. They're a super fun band. But we just couldn't say when, as you can tell from the other comments tonight. So the best thing to do is cancel it, refund our money. Of course, the marketing money has already been spent, the ticket stock. There's just so many expenses related to that. So that's a bit of a heartbreak. And anytime you have to call your patrons and email your patrons and tell them that you can't do a show, I mean, it's just, I once had to cancel a show because an artist was sick, and that was out of our control. And I haven't ever had to do it since, but to have to cancel 2 in 1 year is pretty heartbreaking. So we have another one that was Y Music, which is a kind of a real contemporary chamber ensemble, also from the East Coast. And we haven't officially canceled it yet, but it looks like we're probably going to have to cancel it. Right now it's scheduled for February, but it's most likely that it's going to be canceled in the next week or 2. So that's my big heartbreak.
It's a bummer.
Yeah.
You mentioned this a little bit when you were talking about Mitchell S. Jackson coming as a speaker, but are there any other events or shows coming up that are kind of dealing with themes of gender or race or social justice?
I think all of us who program events at OSU are looking at doing better. And as President Ray said last year, we have work to do, and we're very focused on that, and we're trying to be good listeners. And I know with the American String Series, we're looking at bringing in some Black performers and more diverse artists. It's definitely at top of mind, and we know we can do better, and we will.
Great, thank you, Erin. Thank you for being here.
Thanks for having me.
Yeah, we'll move on to Paul with the Dark Side Cinema. Paul, thanks for being here.
Thanks for having me.
Could you also share just a bit about your experience with cinema and writing and what you currently do at the Dark Side?
We don't have enough time. The Dark Side Cinema started as the Avalon Cinema, which was in what is now the Sky High Brewing Building on Jackson. That was in '96. We started building it, opened in '97. When Carmack came to town, it pretty much torpedoed the Avalon. So I took on a business partner, Lainey, and Joey became my manager. And in 2005, we opened the Dark Side Cinema, and we've been here ever since doing that. So, yes.
Great. And since the start of the pandemic, what has the Dark Side done to keep the public engaged, both with films and just with the theater more generally?
Well, we're closed, like completely. We can't do anything as far as that goes. To keep the public engaged, we've been doing online streaming. Our website is The Portal. We did t-shirt sales, which did really well. We've been doing fundraising, which has been phenomenal. As Jimbo was saying, this community is like amazing. So this is the thing. We've been flying our flag to try to let people know, yeah, we're still here. And people email me, people stop me on the street, and we just stay as engaged as we can.
Yeah. And in terms of the cinema that's running online, what's currently showing now or upcoming?
Oh, that's dirty. I don't have it in front of me. darksidecinema.com. Go there. There'll be, we do a email that comes out every week, and I often will do a review, or one of the people here will do a review of what we have coming out. We've had some really, one of the reasons the Dark Side and the Avalon came into existence is because there's a lot of really good film or product out there that normally will not see a big screen. And with the advent of Netflix, all of this, people have assumed that, well, geez, you can now see whatever you want. The trouble with that is it's not curated. And the thing about the Dark Side, and those of us who book for the Dark Side, we have a focus, and we are able to sort through and offer better choices, we believe. We've been doing it for a while, so maybe we're right, as far as product and movies that you may want to watch. So if you hit our website and go through, you can always email us and say, hey, does this suck? And we'll tell you if we think it does. But, there's usually a reason we have it.
Great. And in terms of kind of the adjustments that you've had to make at the theater, whether that's like the adjusting to kind of like taking donations and the t-shirt sales and the online cinema, what do you feel has worked best out of all those things that you guys have kind of had to pivot to?
Oh boy, it's multifaceted. You know, this is the thing, it's cumulative. To pick one out of that would almost feels like it's disrespecting the others. The donations have been amazing. I mean, people who like, they send us $5 and it's just like, Jesus, it's like, I guess I'm not supposed to swear, sorry. Anyway, it's like, it's like an emotional response to that. And then people have sent me like large sums of money and have said, yeah, we think you're an asshole, you're an idiot, but we, you know, we're sending you the money anyway because we like what you do. So you have this range of people who are giving to us, and I, if you can believe this, don't want to disrespect any of them because they're so important and we wouldn't be here without them. My business partner has been knocking on government doors, trying to shake some change out of their pockets and get that going. And we've been moderately successful with that. So that's between donations and the work that's being done to acquire government loans. It's done really well. We've gotten grants from other organizations, even the studios. Hell must have frozen over, but anyway, they are actually giving us money. So it's a very, you know, I hate to say this, but it's almost like these are unprecedented times.
Yes, they certainly are. In terms of, I asked this question of everyone else, it is likely difficult to say, but does the dark side have a reopening timeline in place? And if so, what does that kind of look like going forward?
Nope. You know, so we're going to be opening for private shows soon, which means that if you have a household that wants to come in and see a movie, we're going to be doing a posting about that. It'll go out in our email and it'll be on our website, and we'll discuss costs and procedures. So the thing, at the risk of being serious for a second, one of the main things we have to do is we've got to make sure we don't kill people. And so we're absolutely committed to making sure that this is absolutely as safe as it can be, to use the word absolute. But the point is that when people come in, the people come to a show, whether it's a movie theater or a play or whatever, to disconnect from whatever's happening outside those doors. As soon as they walk in, this is why they're here. We want them to walk in and then feel safe. We're not going to get away from the hand sanitizers and the plexiglass and the like, but we don't want them to be thinking, is that enough? So we're going to make sure that when people walk into this place, the first thought they have is like, all right, this is cool, we're good. And that's what we're going for. When we get to that point and we are in compliance with all the laws and rules and regulations, then we'll be opening. So we're going to hopefully be opening for private shows, assuming all the ducks are in a row. And then after that, we'll start looking at bringing in newer product and trying to do general admissions of some sort.
Yeah, great. And in terms of kind of, have you noticed any adaptations that other theaters are doing? And then if you have, which of these adaptations that other theaters are currently doing kind of has you hopeful? Or are there any that have you concerned in terms of being the owner of a movie theater?
The adaptations are pretty much being prescribed. There's not a lot of creativity involved here. There's only so much you can do with social distancing. We have small auditoriums, and because of that, we can't put in that many people. So we don't have the option of pulling out seats. If we could pull out seats and bring in more people, we would do that, but that's not something we can do because it would still bring the seat count and patron count down so low. Right now, we're not making money, but we're not bleeding it as quickly as we would be if we tried to pretend like we were open. So those adaptations aren't available to us right now. But, you know, I look at the Picks in Albany, then aside from the fact they're wonderful folks, they've gone all out trying to make this work, and their success at this is really heartening for us.
Great. Going off that a little bit too, I know the dark side has some unique challenges because it's not part of a chain. Can you describe some of those challenges?
Because we're not part of a chain. Well, we don't have corporate backing. I mean, I drive a 20-year-old minivan with 190,000 miles on it. So, I mean, no one's getting rich here. But we don't have the corporate backing. But what that also means is that we don't have the corporate structure that comes with it. So we're winging this all the way through. And fortunately, the other people, the dark side is not just me. There are other people who are involved. The other people involved are, first of all, doing a good job of lengthening my leash so that I can get stuff done. But at the same time, not letting me go off into the, out of bounds and trying to do things that we don't necessarily need to do. Without the corporate structure, we have been able to adapt and I feel move more quickly. And plus the decision to open isn't coming down from on high. It's going to be made by our community. And we're going to decide based on the community, not on some structure.
Right. And I mean, you touched on it a little bit there, but I was also going to ask, what's kind of the benefit of not being part of a chain? Does that kind of impact what it is that you can offer to the community?
Yeah, definitely. That's why I did this. You know, this is why I dropped out of OSU 25 years ago and picked up a tool belt and, sold my soul into bankruptcy. But anyway, the point is it's the product. I mean, this is why those of us who are into independent cinema, especially art house cinema, we do this. It is the product. Film is one of the more universal ways that we populate the world with our pop culture. And the issues that have been discussed here are also available to be discussed in film. With the film that's been available, we have probably not as much choice as people would believe for us to pick films to bring in. But the thing that we can choose is for how long we're going to keep them. So when we bring in a film that might make $1.50, but we go, hold it, that's an important film, we're going to hang on to that. The movie Moonlight came out, I think it was 2018. Joey and I ran it to set up sound, and 10 minutes in, we go, this is the best film of the year. We never saw it as a film dealing with African-American issues. We saw it as a film dealing with closeted gay youth coming into adulthood. And suddenly it's being pronounced as this film that addresses racial issues, which it does. But because it was a good film and because there was good dialogue and and there was acknowledgement of issues that aren't generally acknowledged, that turned out to be a really good film on both fronts. We played The Black Klansman, which was a Spike Lee film that had to do with a person of color infiltrating the KKK. Good film. A friend of mine described it as a film for white people who want to see a movie about Black people. But the same time that played, we brought in a film called Blind Spotting, which was this amazing little indie film that dealt with the gentrification of Oakland. It did not miss a beat. It was an extremely lovely film. We did almost nothing with it because it was up against Black Klansmen. But Joey and I and Lainey, we beat the hell out of that thing. We were not going to let it go until as many people saw it as we possibly could, until we had no choice but to finally move it on to bring something in. So maybe this speaks also to the corporate question that you were asking. We can do that. The longest running films that we had here, one is March of the Penguins, surprise. The other one was Departures. And people are going, what the hell was Departures? Well, let me tell you what Departures was. 2008, I believe it actually won Best Foreign Film. It's a lovely tale of a cellist in Tokyo whose orchestra is closed down and he has to go to his little community and take up the art of funeral director. Sounds great, right? Well, it turned out to be one of the best films that my customers had seen, and we ran that for 21 weeks. So we get to make the choices. We can say, this is something that's serving the community, or this is something the community hasn't figured out yet, so we're going to hang on to this until they do.
Awesome. Thank you, Paul. Thanks for being here.
My pleasure. Thanks for having us.
Yeah, we're now going to turn to audience questions. Steve?
Thanks, Jada. And thank you to all of our panelists. And these are going to be some audience questions. Okay, but before we proceed with that, I do want to remind the audience, viewers, that you can email questions to CitySpeak at corvallisadvocate.com. That's CitySpeak at corvallisadvocate.com, or one of the social media posts that we're streaming currently. Okay. This one was kind of a little bit initially directed, I think, at the Advocate, the newspaper, but I'm going to turn it on you folks. And the question really came down to this. There's a pandemic, there's wildfires. I mean, it's the year of the murder, for crying out loud. Why are the arts important? We've got plenty of problems as a society. Why are the arts important? Shouldn't we be dealing with budgets and there's people that don't have any money, employment, like that? You get the idea. But I think to put some perspective on the evening, and I think that what I'd like to do, Cynthia, could I start with you? And it's a confrontational question, but I think it's an opportunity for a constructive answer. Cynthia, you're muted.
This is one that that I can only speak. Well, I can speak of it a little bit from what I do as an executive director, but from a practicing artist and somebody who thrives on communicating through the arts, I can just say that the arts have what has sustained me through these last 6 months, listening to music, getting out books that I haven't read in a while and remembering, oh, this would be a good one to read during the pandemic, and drawing every day. And so those kinds of things have really made me connect with my own humanity again and keep me a little less stress-free. So from that personal level, I really feel like the arts are important. And then from what people are telling me when they are able to come and visit the shows in the gallery, is that it's important for them to be able to commune with other people, see art that other people have created, to be inspired and feel connected to people. And when we had the I Am My White Ancestor show in the gallery, people really learned a lot by sharing in the artist's perspective. The artist had created these works that were narratives about people from her own ancestry. And so it was a non-threatening way to think about oppression and why that whole thing ever happens, and for people who generally feel like we're good people, but the people who had been oppressed found ways to oppress others, to get ahead or get power or get money or get property. So the arts,
really an ability to distill an important current,
yeah,
contemporaneous social narrative and respond to the zeitgeist. And
yes,
it's as good an answer as I would expect. And I'd like to also then, I'm going to go first to Paul, then Jimbo, and then Aaron on this question. The importance of the arts. Why are we spending an evening as a newspaper talking about this? And why does it deserve, frankly, some of our funds and the like? Paul, let me start with you, and then I'll move to Jimbo, then Aaron.
Arts represent our culture, and we want this culture here when the smoke clears, perhaps literally now. This pandemic will pass. This is going to end, and when it ends, we want to return to some level of normal, whatever the hell that means these days. And the arts are part of what makes Corvallis Corvallis. If you want to look at it a little bit more pragmatically, and perhaps a little more as a capitalist, the fact is the arts, the people represented here also represent, we are what give the flavor to this town. And if the arts are not supported, when we get back to the new normal, this town will be different. And that will affect the businesses that thrive on what the town is and the vibe of this town and the things that Corvallis has to offer. We have a lot to do with that. We have a lot to do with why people come downtown. And so even if you think that movies are silly and plays are awful or whatever, or movies are awful and anyway, the point is that you can't deny that there is an economic advantage that needs to be perpetuated through the bad times. Bad times end, period. So if we put energy into the arts, where every time that they've done that, when things have come back around, they were delighted that they had. History will bear that out. Please don't ask for a reference.
Thank you, Paul. And then I'm going to move to Jimbo, then Aaron.
Yeah, I mean, I think to quote a racist and problematic politician, you know, these are the things that he was asked to cut arts funding in favor of a war effort, and he said, then what are we fighting for? So, I mean, you know, I think the arts, especially for young people, provide a vocabulary for interrogating the world. You know, most of social change and social disruption, you know, is carried a lot of the times when it can't be carried in the political sphere. It's carried by our artistic, you know, disciplines, theater and music and movies and books. These are things, and visual art. These are things that, you know, people use when it's hard to speak out about what's happening, or the, you know, typical sort of discourse isn't possible. And I think, especially here in Corvallis, you know, we're known as an arts community. I remember when I first started working at the Majestic, I was talking about, you know, donations and kind of how much we rely on donation and volunteerism. And it was someone from Eugene who said, oh, well, yeah, of course, you live in an arts community. I was just like, you're from Eugene, though. And so, you know, I think, you know, what Paul was saying is completely apt. You know, this will end. You know, we can't burn down all of the infrastructure that has made Corvallis this amazing arts community. And quite frankly, no one will let it happen, because the reason that there are so many edifices to art in Corvallis is because everyone in Corvallis is an artist. They're a musician, or they're a sculptor, or they're an actor, or they're a painter, or they're, you know, a filmmaker or a writer. You know, these people require these, you know, buildings and venues and infrastructure in order to find meaning and satisfaction in their lives. And so, you know, when people talk about, well, you're early on, they're just like, well, you're just going to shut down the Majestic. You know, even during the pandemic, that wasn't a possibility, because these folks needed the Majestic just to survive. But also, we can't, you know, burn down our great structures just because this is a time of trouble. You know, Paul hit it on the head. You know, these are the things that add meaning and texture to our existence, and so we can't let them go by the wayside just because a microscopic thing is killing so many people.
Quite well said. And I'm going to go ahead and move to Aaron.
Well, I think my predecessors covered it really well, but I'll just add that the arts are a legitimate career. They're a legitimate part of our economy. They're an excellent venue for expression and an outlet for people. They're, you know, they're a way to engage with other people. They're, you know, a way to engage with our community. I mean, all the people that volunteer at the Majestic or the Arts Center, that's an important part of their life, what they give. And all the philanthropists here we have in Corvallis that support the arts, you know, I've been involved with different organizations, and you look at the donor list, and they're the same people that support throughout our community. You know, we know them and rely on them, and obviously the arts are important to them, and that's why they give. I think now more than ever, I mean, who among us hasn't been watching movies on Netflix and looking for, you know, looking at YouTube videos or trying to find live music on Facebook? I mean, we're all hungry for the things that we do on a daily basis that kind of sustain us. And, you know, important.
I get it. Yeah.
And Steve, can I break back in for a second?
Yeah, please.
So for you number people out there, the most recent Americans for the Arts survey that was conducted in the area showed that the arts brought in $75 million annually to the Corvallis area. So, I mean, there's definitely dollar signs in what all of us do.
Thank you, Jimbo. And, you know, I guess that I want to bring in one of my concerns as well, actually. And I was hoping we'd get asked this, and we have to some extent. And what's been pointed out is, you know, y'all are directors, you're administrative in a lot of ways, but what's your experience of what's happening to actual artists right now? They can't get on a stage and vibe back what's going on with the audience. Somebody can't attend their own reception and see the way that the art is responded to and such. I could go on with that. But there's also a financial aspect. And I think the other thing that is not often discussed, and I think, Aaron, you spoke to this a few times with me in person, what is going to happen to not just the musicians, but all the support staff around the arts, concerts, theater, and the rest. Aaron, I'm going to actually start with you, because what's happening to all that
well,
support
I know
people?
there's so many, there's such a large part of this economy behind the scenes beyond the artists and the musicians and the actors and performers. When I went to call the booking agent to talk about canceling one of the SAC Presents concerts, I could not get a hold of anybody. I couldn't get a hold of the person that I'd work with, or his boss. And finally, a month later, I got a call from the president of this huge booking outlet in New York, and basically everybody had been laid off. I mean, they're hurting, and some people had been furloughed, but that's just one tiny part. You think of people who work in lighting, people who are stagehands, people who are roadies. There's just so much of this economy that feeds into the larger economy, and those people are not working, or they're trying to find other work, and so, you know, there are several. I don't have access to quote them right now, but there are some organizations that are raising money to support artists and the people behind the scenes who work in the arts nationally, and so obviously those people are just as important to sustain, and so that they'll be back when it's safe to do so. And on a local level as well, I mean, keeping our venues open, keeping our galleries open, trying to support where we can, trying to, you know, even eat at restaurants or order out or buy gift cards, you know, anything that we can do to keep Corvallis and kind of sustain that quality of life here that we have come to love so much. We just got to get through this and help each other. And our community is pretty generous when it comes to that.
Then I'm going to move to Cynthia, then Jimbo, and then Paul. Cynthia.
So we decided to still have our Arts Alive event, because our Artist Accelerator program was set up to really support artists succeeding in the creative economy. And one way that we knew artists were, well, and it's even 20th century not even 21st. One of the ways that artists are selling and making connections all over the world is via online activity and engagement. And so having Arts Alive as a virtual event this year was, as one artist said, he has been saying for 3 years he was going to get online, and having a deadline, artists live on deadlines, having a deadline to get something put together to put online was the kick in the butt he needed. And so the whole event was a learning curve for most of our artists. A few had already experienced some virtual teaching, or were just a little more adept at the virtual world.
You know, it dovetails into another question too, which we'll get to in a minute. I want everybody thinking about this. So much of the creative the audience for creative material now is viewing online, and is that really the same as encountering painting in person,
Yeah,
film on a big screen? You know, I think it becomes obvious in stage, not so much.
yeah,
Discuss that, but think about that, the answer for that for a minute. I do want to move over to Jimbo real quickly
yeah.
on this question of what's happening to artists and what is happening to pay for support staff. And I also want to be mindful of time.
So yeah, I mean, as far as artists, as I said, they were not able to stop performing. They had to perform to be okay, for their mental health to be okay, for their lives to have meaning. And so, you know, within kind of, you know, I think March 11th was the day that we started canceling everything in the whole world. And then I think it was really within 2 weeks we had our first performance, because they couldn't not perform. They couldn't not do their art. And so we've been really lucky in that our format, or our form of performance, can transfer to online relatively easily. It's definitely not the same thing. You're missing that audience engagement, but you know, we were able to at least have something going relatively quick and sustained through. As far as support staff,
Oh, thank you. Yeah.
yeah, as far as support staff, that's been the really tough thing, because, you know, we say the theater is like an iceberg. What you see is only the top, you know, 10% of what's happening. A little more snarkily, tech folks like to say that, you know, without us, actors would be late, naked, and in the dark. And so, you know, there's a lot going on to support that. And unfortunately, that need wasn't able to be served through the Zoom stuff. We had some tech staff that could make the transition, but we just don't need all the same stuff. But on the flip side, now that we're filming and stuff, there is a little bit more of that, you know, coming back, and we're having to learn new disciplines in the sense that, yes, we're still doing plays and musicals, but we're also creating small, you know, short films and sewing them together with all the scenes and stuff. And so there's definitely been that. But as far as the wider technical theater community, I mean, I know hundreds of friends that have been furloughed, laid off. You know, our unions are definitely leading the way. You know, SAG and IATSE and all of our different unions are leading the way with keeping folks safe. But that's really meaning that, you know, a lot of folks can't go back to work yet.
Aaron, you had your hand up, and I wanted to give you just another second. Then I'm going to move to Paul, but
Yeah,
then
I
there's
was
another
just gonna
question
say,
come in as well. So
I was just going to say quickly, you know, it's not all bad, because musicians are going into the studio and they're, you know, crisis inspires art, and art is being created because it's a form of expression during this time, and songs are being written. I mean, there's been so many times throughout history when music has been such an important part, an important expression about what was going on at that time, and this time is no different. So I would assume that you know, scripts are being written. You know, I mean, there's just so many things that are going on behind the scenes because people have time. And the other thing, on a happy note, that I've heard a lot of is when you talk to musicians, when they're interviewed, you know, on TV and stuff, they always talk about, well, I'm spending time with my family. Well, you know, that's not all bad. Everybody is spending a little more time with their family, and that is going to create a different kind of culture than what we've had. And some of the ramifications of this are just going to be really interesting to see.
And then, yeah, and you know, I want to get into positive ramification toward the end in a minute. But Paul, did you have anything to add, or?
Well, my industry is in crisis. There's not a lot happening. The good thing is that there are a lot of people who are working on smaller projects that they never would have looked at had it not been for this little interesting, these unprecedented times, to coin a phrase. But that's the thing, is that there's going to be, in my hope is that there's going to be a lot of really good smaller product coming out from the minds of people who haven't been inundated by the day-to-day. Stay tuned.
Thank you, Paul. And I think by now we know one another outside of this forum, and probably you have rightly figured out that the term unprecedented times is finally been insane. So thank you for that, Paul.
You're welcome.
Cynthia, and I'm going to direct this only at Cynthia because I think it's obvious in the other forms of art. But a painting online versus encountering it in person, you just in a minute kind of unwrap what that difference in dynamic is.
Well, one of the first shows we did as a virtual gallery show, sharing that online, all the images were uploaded and they were all there, but we still hung the show and then actually take photographs of it hung. And when I finally saw the works in person, there was a texture and a layering and a dimension that an image just didn't capture as well. And the whole idea of how did she do that comes to mind. And so I could have a conversation with trying to figure out how she had done that. Whereas a photo on the computer screen or on your phone, little teeny tiny image, just doesn't come across. I mean, it was still a compelling image, but that dialogue is missing.
There's just something about seeing the brush strokes.
Yeah.
Okay, and then, you know, along with this, and there's been a certain amount of us, I think, as a group, seeing what is positive, what is negative. What adaptations, you know, are going to be out there in the future? We've discussed that to some extent. What is your kind of what is the last thing that you would tell our viewer in terms of that you find that is inspiring about the moment? Obviously, there are challenges. We know what those are. We just spent 20 minutes unwrapping the hard stuff. You know, and I'll start with Paul, and then I'll move to Aaron, Jimbo, then Cynthia. Paul.
Run that by me again. My brain is wandering off.
Is there something inspiring in the present moment from the standpoint of challenge and overcoming that moment? Perhaps maybe one way to approach it
is, well, I think that what's inspiring to me is that I'm old. And what's inspiring about that is this is not the first time I've seen something like this. When we went to digital in 2013, that was supposed to be the end of it. And, you know, meanwhile, welcome to the dark side. We're still here. And this is, in the arts, that's always kind of been a theme. The next thing is going to take out the last thing. And I think that what's happening here, I think one of the things that the arts probably has to offer, if people are open to it, is that we do survive the next thing. Art continues. And for me, I think in my experience and in my industry, you know, my theaters were supposed to be done when TV came out. And so for me, when I look at this, yeah, they said that about TV. We're going to be fine. So we're going to be fine.
Great. And then I will go ahead and I'll move to, I think, Cynthia.
It's the number of people who have confirmed this to me is that we're finding what's important to us, what we value the most, and many people are now discovering that their own creative expression or the or enjoyment of others people's creative expression is very important. So I'm inspired to think that this is going to be a new uh, generation of people who'll stand up more and be more vocal about support for the arts and get out there and spend money and just really be a strong advocate in that way, because we've seen what's valuable to us.
Jimbo.
Yeah, the most inspiring thing for me is that, you know, we've learned so much from this pandemic about what we're not doing well. You know, the opportunities we're missing, the communities we're not connecting with. I have an actor who's a power chair user who told me that the pandemic has been a blessing for them because they're getting cast for the first time in their life in significant roles, whereas in the past they wouldn't, because of the accessibility challenges and other things that go with, you know, a power chair user being an actor in community theater. And so, you know, for me, the challenge of this process, this pandemic, has really just emboldened me to take all the things that we've learned and go into the after with a different perspective about what community is, what community looks like, and the priorities we need to have in serving.
Thank you, Jimbo. And then Aaron.
Well, a few things come to mind. One of the things that really inspired me early on was how important it was to our teaching faculty in the arts to figure out how to give students the best experience they possibly could and how creative they got. And like one thing comes to mind where Chad in our theater department had just built a patio, and he teaches set design, and he teaches about different kinds of woods. And so he's out in his backyard on Zoom, like this is right after we went remote. And he's talking about why he used this wood instead of another wood. And he's using his patio as an example. And there were so many examples of that throughout that spring term where, I mean, older faculty who used to swear they couldn't use a computer, you know, are now teaching on Zoom and having a learning curve and taking that technology challenge. So I've been really inspired by that. And then I talked a little bit before about just the level of outreach that we've been able to experience in going remote and presenting online events and connecting with our alumni and connecting with our other campuses. And I think as we go forward and we're doing live events again, also access, like Jimbo talked about. I mean, we've learned some things about how appreciative people are when you're doing events of having live captions, because there are people who, I mean, obviously it helps people who have hearing issues, but there's also people with other issues that can't follow as fast or that sort of thing. So we've learned some things that we wouldn't have learned, and we're reaching out to people that we wouldn't have reached. And so as we go forward, we're going to have to keep those things in mind and think about how we're going to present things in the future. And I hope it's different.
Thank you, Aaron. And then, you know, I want to return to what the first question I'm going to I never answered this, and I think it was directed at the paper, snarkily so. Why are we doing this panel when there's all these other problems? We're journalists, for crying out loud. Well, I don't know a journalist alive that's not a fan of fiction. There's a popular saying, it's kind of I think something from Faulkner, that journalists can give you the facts. Fiction, which is an art, will give you the truth. We do storytelling at the Advocate. We do storytelling nights. We have an admiration for the arts. I don't know of any journalist that doesn't. I guess that dovetails somewhat self-servingly to say, please do subscribe and support us as well. Support the arts in our community. You don't want to find out what happens if you don't. But the other piece of that is I think that we're in an era in which there will be a resurgence in arts. And I appreciate all the work that you all do. Confession, I know all of these people outside of this forum. I think they do amazing work, and I know they all work incredibly hard. So I want to very deeply express my appreciation for you taking time on an otherwise really nice looking Tuesday night to be here with us and speak with the community. Jada.
Thanks, Steve. Yes, thanks again to the panel. Thanks, Paul, Jimbo, Cynthia, Aaron. Thanks a lot for being here. Thank you also to the Corvallis Advocate staff for all the work they do behind the scenes to make these City Speaks possible. Also, thank you to our supporters, Peak Sports and First Alternative Natural Foods Co-op. The City Speak is adjourned for now, so good night.
Thank you.